So why is Ethiopia's Nobel Peace Prize winner bombing his own country? In a rare statement, the committee which awarded Abey Ahmed his Nobel Peace Prize has called on all parties to end the escalating violence. As our final expert Ahmed Solomon says, it's difficult to see a military solution.
History has shown that Ethiopia's problems aren't going to be resolved through fighting and through bloodshed.
Ethiopia is the second most populous country in Africa, with a population of 110 million people. 7 million live in Tigray. Hannah is from its regional capital, Mekelle.
The people is a peace-loving people. Unfortunately, if they know there is something that's against their existence, they will fight back.
Our previous expert, Adam Abebe, described how the TPLF refused to endorse the New Prosperity Party, which wasn't organised along ethnic lines. Hannah says there's a determination to safeguard cultural bonds, as past struggles have shown.
Tigryans were oppressed over the dark region period. They were oppressed against their language, against their ethnicity, because they fought for their existence. Their ethnic background is valued in front of other ethnic groups.
She says many Tigrayans supported Abey Ahmed.
Towards TPLF, to be honest, the youth is totally against that party, because they believe it becomes a party that cannot transform. Rather, a party lives in the past history. There was no hope of change and democracy with the rule of TPLF in Tigray. So when Abiy came to power, the expectation was high.
Hannah now lives and works as a journalist for the BBC in Kenya, but her family is still in Tigray. When did you first hear that the conflict had started, fighting had begun?
It was early morning. It was a friend's text that woke me up from my sleep. He said, "Have you heard about Ethiopia?" And I said, "What? What's new in Ethiopia?" He said, "Abey Ahmed ordered the military to attack TPLF," he said. And I was shocked, because I have seen the fear we had realized.
The ongoing block on communications in and out of the region means she hasn't been able to reach friends or family there since the fighting started.
Now I am not able either to call, even to see my family, because I cannot travel. There is no any means of transportation to Tigray, and now it's a war zone. I have no idea how the situation is affecting their lives. They live in the area, which would be part of the targets of the attack. And I always pray and hope that TPLF leaders, I imagine they will fight to finish in this fight.
Hannah is especially worried about her 11-year-old brother. He has epilepsy and cerebral palsy.
He's a child who really needs treatment, and everything is dependent on us, because he is a kind of child who cannot speak, who cannot walk. I don't have words to explain my fears. Every day is a nightmare for me.
So why is the Prime Minister fighting his own people?
Abiy is fighting for his power, and the TPLFs are fighting for their power.
Part 4. Domino Effect.
You have two extremely battle-hardened and well-equipped forces fighting each other in very rugged, mountainous terrain.
Ahmed Solomon is a research fellow with the Africa programme at Chatham House. He says the battle in Tigray is devastating the region. The United Nations says the situation is developing into a full-scale humanitarian crisis.
The TPLF has a military history, an organisational sophistication, a firepower that rivals the federal forces, if not surpasses it. So you have that alongside armed farmers and militias, anywhere up from 200 to 250,000 armed fighters. And that's a pretty terrifying prospect of what might be to come in terms of a lengthy conflict in the region.
In a recent tweet, Abey Ahmed said, "Concerns that Ethiopia will descend into chaos are unfounded and a result of not understanding our context deeply. But the fighting in Tigray hasn't ended as swiftly as he hoped it would, and there are fears it could foment instability in other ethnic regions."
So there is the potential for this conflict to evolve and to spread to different parts of the country. And that, I think, is when you could be thinking about calling it a civil war. We have the involvement, for example, of Amhara and militia and special forces in the fighting in Tigray alongside the federal army. This is something that could become a case of different sides dividing to support one or the other, and a case of my enemy's enemy is my friend, for example, where despite there being historical differences between groups or animosity in the past, you might see short-term tactical alliances prevailing.
Ahmed is also monitoring how the conflict might destabilise other nations.
Ethiopia is an extremely important country in the Horn of Africa and East Africa. It's one of the largest contributors of peacekeeping troops to UN missions, with thousands of troops largely based across the Horn of Africa, including in Somalia. So there are reports that Ethiopia has already begun removing some of its forces from those missions, so that could have an impact on peace and security, on stability elsewhere.
If Ethiopian troops are redeployed from Somalia to Tigray, it creates an opportunity for militant groups like Al-Shabaab. Back in Tigray, Ahmed says parts of the region were running out of food before federal troops arrived. Crops have been destroyed by one of the worst locust plagues for years, and harvest stores from last year were low. Roads are blocked and the airport is closed, so fresh supplies can't get through. There have been power cuts and water shortages. Humanitarian workers have left the area on safety grounds.
The intensified fighting will have left many people, civilians as well as armed forces, caught up with injuries and casualties. There is some information coming out with civilians that are crossing into Sudan, and of course I think the majority are talking about their personal desperation and having lost their homes, having lost their livelihoods, and really not being certain of when conflict might end and when they might be able to go back home. The situation across the border in Sudan is one where there is an increasing number of refugees on a daily basis. 4,000-5,000 refugees seem to be crossing over from Tigray region into Sudan, and this is projected to increase potentially up to 100,000 refugees.
Sudan is host to over 1 million refugees from other African countries. International aid workers there report treating wounded fighters and civilians from Ethiopia, and they're expecting thousands more in the weeks to come.
Calls for an immediate truce, a ceasefire, and an end to the conflict and coming to the negotiation table really haven't borne fruit at this time. But there is a potential, if this military operation that is supposed to be short and incisive looks as if it's going to evolve and become much more protracted and lead to heavier civilian loss, then there could be an opportunity for mediation to play a part.